what took place today, Scott. You should be paid a lot of money from the Trump administration for helping to.
Oh no, I get paid a lot of money here.
Well, I know you
just
do,
to be clear.
and in other places too. But you should be paid by the Trump administration for what you said because
statutory authority.
Yes.
Now,
But
if he
Abby's
does
right,
that,
those are narrow.
maybe somebody ends up challenging that, and they
Sure,
are
let me
different
make scope.
with
Scott,
the statutes already
You have to
exist.
actually meet the requirements of those statutes. Circumstances under other statutes, but it is not broad, it is not unlimited, and it is not forever. Correct?
No, but to loop back to the benefits that we've
Did you
seen.
hear anything that I just read?
I did, but it's
I
actually
listen,
not
I
accurate.
understand.
In this clip, we see Abby Phillip do something a little bit different. She actually has two economists to come on her panel on Newsnight in wake of Donald Trump's absolute drumming by the Supreme Court. And in this clip, we see Abby Phillip actually corner one of the Trump-favoring economists who tries to lie, and his lie just completely backfires. As usual, let's watch the clip in full. I potentially may give my thoughts and perspective a little bit throughout, but I'm going to predominantly save it towards the end. Let's get into it.
Good evening, I'm Abby Phillip in New York. Let's get right to what America's talking about. President Trump's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Trump is fuming tonight after the Supreme Court stood up to him and said it was illegal when he used the emergency powers to slap sweeping tariffs across the globe on his so-called Liberation Day. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion saying in no uncertain terms that emergency powers should not be treated as some kind of cheat code. The decision is a severe loss for Trump, and it throws the future of his signature policy into limbo. And as you can imagine, he didn't take the news well.
To show you how ridiculous the opinion is, however, the court said that I'm not allowed to charge even $1. I can't charge $1. But I am allowed to cut off any and all trade or business with that same country. In other words, I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country. I'm even allowed to impose a foreign country-destroying embargo. I can embargo. I can do anything I want, but I can't charge $1.
But the president has a backup plan, which he says he signed into as an executive order tonight, and that's going to be to reimpose his tariffs at least for the next 150 days. The big question now is, though, what happens to that $134 billion in tariff money that the government has already raked in? Well, the courts didn't really say what would happen with it, but the battle is just beginning as states and companies and Americans start to demand their refunds. This seems to be an unexpected but pretty clear ruling against the president on a statute that has really never been used the way Trump attempted to use it. Ellie, what do you make of just how clear and I thought simple, frankly, the Roberts ruling was, and the fact that it was 6-3?
So this is a what goes around comes around moment in the law. If you applauded when the Supreme Court struck down Joe Biden's student debt program in 2023, you can't boo this, because the legal theory that was used here is almost exactly the same, which is if Congress is going to delegate some of its power over to the president, which they can do, they have to specifically say what they're authorizing him to do in the law they pass if the president's going to then use it to do something of massive economic or political impact. And the 6-3 ruling, by the way, people hear 6-3, they think, oh, must be the typical 6-3. This was not the typical 6-3. You had Chief Justice Roberts, you had Neil Gorsuch, and you had Amy Coney Barrett joining with the three liberals to form the majority. So whatever one thinks, you guys will get to the economics of it and the politics of it. But legally, this is a sound decision according to the precedent that's already been set.
Well, let's get to the economics of it, because essentially they're just saying, look, this is not the statute to do what you want to do, and particularly if what you want to do is just random tariffs on every country in the world at whatever number you want it to be. There are other things that you can do. It's just not this.
Yeah, so let's back up 1 second. This is strictly having to do with IEEPA. This does not have to do with a sweeping tariff rebut from the Supreme Court. IEEPA only enables the president to block trade or stop trade with countries. He cannot gain one single dollar from the IEEPA ruling. The other tariffs in place, which are about half of what's in place, has not been touched by the Supreme Court. He has a constitutional right to have those tariffs in place, and he's now going to replace the IEEPA tariffs that were put in place, which, by the way, were put in place mainly with China, Mexico, and Canada in order to secure our borders and stop the flow of fentanyl into the country. This was part of his negotiation. So we're going to take the IEPA away, which the Supreme Court ruled on today. He's then going to use Section 232, Section 301, Section 122, which, by the way, he already enacted Section 121 tonight with a sweeping 10% tariff, and just replace the IEPA tariffs. That's really what we need to focus on here. This was not a sweeping rebut of President Trump's tariffs. This was IEPA only.
I guess I disagree on a host of dimensions. One dimension that seems really, really important is, while it's true that you're already starting to see the president talk about other trade authorities and, in fact, invoke other trade authorities to try to replicate some of these IEPA tariffs that were struck down this morning, the reality is there is a lot more process that is required to be able to effectuate those other types of trade authorities. The existing 10% across the board tariffs that were levied tonight, those are only going to be in place for 150 days and only will stay in place if Congress authorizes them to continue. So this is a really significant ruling, and it's a really significant ruling because from a legal perspective, you had a court who stood up to the president and said the power to tax and the power to spend rests with Congress and Congress alone. I do agree with you from an economic perspective. If you think about what this ruling really means, there have been about $140 billion of IEPA tariffs that have been levied in the last year. Those tariffs have fallen through to consumers in the form of higher prices. And if and when we see any refunds, and again, the decision isn't clear about exactly what process that would undertake, even if they were to do refunds, those would go to firms and not to the American consumers. And so I actually do think this is quite significant from the consumer's perspective because they're unlikely to see any relief.
Well, let me just take two quick points. First, from the consumer perspective, we have not seen any inflationary pressures from tariffs. That is null and void.
That is definitely not true.
That is very true.
And my
the true inflation numbers are close to 1% right now. So let's leave that on the table. I just want to say one thing. The semantics of a tax versus a tariff is in question here. All right. The president has the constitutional right to tariff, not to tax. And
the Supreme Court settled that issue, or they answered that point today, and they made it very clear that in this case, a tariff is a tax. That is, and both are in the hands of Congress.
And that is not true. A tax and that's semantics.
How is that semantics?
Because we already have the tariff law of the Tariff Act of 1962 and 1974, which gives the president the right to control imports via.
Okay, but what is a tariff?
A tariff
What is a tariff?
A tariff is a fee charged to another country.
Okay.
Tax.
No,
it's not charged to another
That's the semantics.
tax on importers.
A tariff is a what?
It is a fee charged. We cannot tax a foreign
A
country.
tariff
We can tax
is a
citizens.
fee charged to who?
A foreign country.
No, it is not. Okay.
I'll tell you who paid. Well, I'll answer that. I'm not even.
And just really quick, I'm just going to chime in this one time. Look at the smirk on his face. The reason why he's smirking the way that he did is because he knew that he was telling a lie. And as I always say, the right are so used to never getting any pushback. But when he did get pushback, he smirked because he was like, oh, darn, they've got me. Like, this is what it is that they do. It's absolutely embarrassing. But he knew that he was telling a lie, and he knows exactly what a tariff is, and he knows exactly the people that pay the tariff. But he just doesn't go along with his Donald Trump, the right's agenda, to say other countries are paying the tariff, as opposed to the truth that it's the American people that are paying the tariff.
Economic expert. The importers. I have a friend who imports T-shirts and sneakers from overseas. He pays the tariff, not China.
Is there any evidence? I can't believe you just said that. Any evidence that a foreign government has paid Donald Trump's tariffs?
We're talking about producers in foreign countries.
Tariffs are paid by who?
Tariffs can be paid by many.
They
can be paid by the importers.
They are paid by companies. Some of them are foreign companies, but some of them are American companies. Here's one corporation. This is actually the plaintiff in this case. Here's what he says he wants to see.
And they know exactly what they took from us, when and why and how much. And they can just reverse the gears and send it back to us. It's our money. They took it unlawfully. They have to return it. And I'm not crying for them that they find it inconvenient.
They said they spent $10 million paying Trump's tariffs that we now know are illegal. And on top of that, just to circle back to what we were talking about, the CBO this is one of many reports on this, but the CBO just recently said U.S. businesses will absorb 30% of the import price increases by reducing their profit margins. The remaining 70% will be passed through to consumers by raising prices. So the net effect of the tariffs will be to raise consumer prices by the full portion of the cost of the tariffs borne domestically, 95%. So look, at the end of the day, he's a business owner. You can't tell him he didn't bear the cost of tariffs. He wrote the check.
Well, which is it? You said all of it was passed through the consumers. You said that most of it was absorbed by some of the companies. It sounds like maybe it might be a little bit of both. I mean, how you refund this, I have no idea. I mean, this is a total mess. You're talking about massive amount of money.
How did they charge it?
And
they can refund what they charged.
I guess, but if you want to go into the Treasury and start writing checks on this, it feels, and the court acknowledged that it feels like it's going to be a bit of a mess. I assume, Ellie, there'll be massive amount of litigation about this over the next couple of years. I will just say, politically today, it was a big breaking news day, but I just think we ought to acknowledge something. This is a properly functioning government today. The President of the United States, the head of the executive branch, made a policy decision. The Supreme Court, that renders legal opinions about these kinds of decisions, made a decision. They said you can't do that. The President of the United States said, okay, I agree, and I will acknowledge your decision. I am going to use a different statute to try to do what I want to do. This is properly functioning government. And I'll tell you one more thing. For every Democrat and every media person that has gone on for the last year or two about how the Supreme Court is a wholly owned subsidiary of Donald Trump, that it's not independent, that it does whatever he says to do, obviously that narrative was obliterated today. So to me, I thought the ruling was sound. I think the president is sound to try other statutes. And I think the narratives about the court not being independent and the president not obeying the court were totally blown up today.
That was a very charitable explanation of what took place today, Scott. You should be paid a lot of money from the Trump administration for helping to...
Oh, no, I get paid a lot of money here.
Well, I know you
just
do,
to be clear.
and in other places too, but you should be paid by the Trump administration for what you said, because the reality is that the president didn't just accept the ruling like you said he did.
Yes, he did.
He got up there. He got up there in the press conference today, and he attacked the U.S. Supreme Court justices. He said that they should be embarrassed for their families for making a decision that stood up to him. He attacked them and said they were disloyal and unpatriotic. He said they were disloyal to the Constitution even. That's more than disagreement. That's irresponsible rhetoric. And the problem is, Scott, even though today the Supreme Court did the right thing, according to everyone here at the table, apparently, except maybe you, Anthony, the truth is that this is the first major decision where they have actually disagreed with the president on any of his priorities. So yes, they got one right, but that doesn't negate everything else that they've done. Donald Trump doesn't like to govern. Donald Trump likes to rule by decree, and the Supreme Court finally stood in and said you can't do that on this one issue.
Quickly, if I could, I mean, the reason there's not National Guard on the streets in Chicago right now is the Supreme Court blocked that too. And I think Trump's about to go on a bit of a losing streak with the court. I mean, between today, he's going to lose birthright, I believe, birthright citizenship eventually. I also think he's going to lose his effort to fire Lisa Cook off the Fed. So I think, to Scott's point, I think the narrative that the Supreme Court is automatically in Trump's pocket and always has been, I think it is overblown. And I think they're disproving that now and will continue over the next several months.
Yeah, it's interesting because they do push the envelope on this stuff, and they could easily have, to your point, I mean, there are all kinds of different statutory authorities for the president to do all kinds of different things, and he's going to use some of them now. And they could have tried to do it that way. I don't know. Do you have a theory? I have a theory, but I'm curious if you have a theory about why the Trump administration decided to do it this particular way.
Yeah, I have a bit of a theory, which is that of all of the trade authorities that exist to support the president's agenda, this is the one that has the least set of requirements attached to it. It is the one where, with a stroke of a pen on any particular day, and in fact, we've seen it on 60 days so far in this Trump administration, you are able to change tariff rates because you see a commercial you don't like, or your adversary or ally does something that you don't agree with. And I think the challenge with all of these other approaches, some of which would actually require the president to go to Congress and try to legislate the trade agenda, as has always been done historically, don't afford you that same flexibility. And I think that flexibility might sound like it's attractive, but actually, Scott, to your point, I think today you did see government function and our institutions function the way they're supposed to. But something that you also saw was the reintroduction of incredible volatility into our trade policy. What are businesses supposed to be planning for? What is the tariff rate likely to be next week, next month, 6 months from now? How do consumers plan for that? And how do our allies think about us in negotiations when it's not at all clear what authorities or the extent to which they're legally viable pathways to effectuate some of these policies?
I think the last point you made is one of the most important for how the president moves forward here, because if you talk to him about this, beyond just the economics, he believes these tariffs and the ability for him to unilaterally do it is his biggest diplomatic tool. He thinks that it's been huge in trade negotiations. He thinks it's helped him solve some of these peace agreements. He thinks it gives the American president, in any room that that person is in, this massive cudgel against other countries to extract outcomes that we want on a number of fronts. So I think the last point you made is very true.
And he's wrong about that.
Why is he wrong about it?
Chief Justice Roberts said this: the president asserts the extraordinary power to unilaterally impose tariffs of unlimited amount, duration, and scope. In light of the breadth, history, and constitutional context of that asserted authority, he must identify clear congressional authorization to exercise it. He's pretty crystal clear. That's the scope. There's a reason that, according to Chief Justice Gorsuch and 6 other Supreme Court justices, Congress does not give that power to the president. And it has to do with the fact that, as we just discussed, tariffs, like taxes, cost people money. Money comes out of their pockets and goes to the Treasury. And that is a power that belongs to Congress. And if Congress, which is, controlled by the president's party, supports the president's agenda, and if these tariffs are so popular and such a key to economic prosperity, 2 questions. Why are they so unpopular? Why do Americans say, 56% say they hurt the economy? And why won't Congress just codify them?
So what I would say that, first of all, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution gives the president the right to work on international affairs, manage international affairs, and trade. Period. Hard stop. He has the right to implement tariffs. That's not the question here. The question is IEPA. To loop back to the benefits that we've seen.
Did you hear anything that I just read?
I did, but it's
I mean,
actually
listen,
not
I
accurate.
understand what you're saying.
They did just rule on the narrow statute, though.
Just a second. I understand the context of what you're saying in that they're ruling on IEPA. But what Chief Justice Roberts is saying is that what Trump is asserting is that using national security as a justification to impose tariffs of any size, scope, and duration is not constitutional. He says that very clearly here.
That is IEPA. That's fine.
Okay. So we're in agreement on that. The president has limited authorities that are delegated by Congress to impose trade restrictions under certain circumstances, under other statutes, but it is not broad, it is not unlimited, and it is not forever. Correct?
No, that's actually not correct. He has congressional authority to issue and implement tariffs under Section 122.
Under limited
They each have their own limits
scope that
and
is
their own
delegated by Congress. That is the only
Section
point that I'm making.
232, for example, gives him the ability to put
the
tariffs
only
at
point that I am
50%
making,
across the board.
The only point that I'm making is
they're substantial.
The only point
He
that I'm
has-
making is that Congress determines what powers he has in those.
They've
realms.
already determined that as well.
Just Anthony, you're making the argument that might have been okay yesterday, but today it lost, so it's not the law anymore.
Elliot, he's saying that there's statutes that already exist.
Oh, I know.
Yes. The president's going to pivot to
Which
other
is fine.
statutory authorities.
Yes.
No,
Now,
but
if he
Abby's
does
right, those
that,
are narrow.
maybe somebody ends up challenging that, and they
Sure,
are
let me
different
make-
scope,
let me make-
but the statutes already
You have
exist.
to actually meet the requirements of those statutes.
Right.
He
Yes.
can't just say, I want 50% tariffs on the whole world. I'm just going to put it under this statute. If he could have done that, he would have done it. But he didn't. Those statutes are narrow. He has to meet certain requirements, and those requirements are dictated by Congress, not by the president.
Think about it this way.
So that's the only point.
IEPA, the law that he tried to use today, would have been a sledgehammer for him to put in tariffs. Instead, that's been taken away, and now he's going to have to use a ball-peen hammer instead. The statutes that are left for him are much more restrictive. Still painful and still effective, but much more fine, much more limited in their scope.
Let's hit pause real quick, because there's more on the other side. We'll talk about the choice words that the president.
It's quite interesting to me when it comes to MAGA, and it doesn't matter. And this is the thing, look, we cover Abby Phillip's Newsnight multiple days a week. I give my thoughts on my perspective. So we see so many different kinds and different layers of MAGA individuals. One of the things that is always consistent when it comes to these guys is the fact that they lie. They'll lie and they will try and, exactly the same way Donald Trump tries to do, test the waters. Let me put this lie out here. Let me see what happens. If they don't get any pushback, then they'll continue to lie, or they'll push out even further in regards to how big of a lie that it actually is. And as we saw the Trump MAGA Economist, he tried to do the exact same thing. Scott Jennings, even at times, he was also trying to put some things out there. But Abby Phillip, which to her credit, she cornered both of them and she pulled them both up on the lies that it is that they tried to spread. One of the things that I consistently say about Abby Phillip is that sometimes I needed to push back a bit more on these guys. Sometimes she allows them to get away with so many things, but she done well here to push back and corner both of them. The one thing that I'm going to say is this. If somebody is listening to this video and you are an American citizen, and you was affected by Donald Trump's tariffs, you should be doing everything you possibly can. Literally call your local politicians, your reps, whoever it may be, and you should be pushing as much and as hard as possible to get that money back. I'm going to say that because Donald Trump has been going on this victory lap talking about the billions and the trillions, I think not the trillions, sorry, the billions of what it is that the US has raked in from tariffs. But the majority of that tariffs was paid for by you, the American people. So it only makes sense that you go and get what is rightfully yours. That is what it is that I encourage each and every single one of you guys to do. But let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below on this exchange between the MAGA Economist as well as Scott Jennings and Abby Phillip and the rest of the panel as well. All right, guys, give the video a thumbs up purely for the YouTube algorithm, and hit subscribe if you're interested in my perspective and my opinion on things that are taking place in the United States political world, and you just want to hear my opinion from someone who lives over the seas. All right, guys, have a good one, and I'll see you in the next clip.